Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to cover another episode of Sweet Tooth. Really, in this episode, we are going to get to know who exactly the tribe that I had mentioned who was in the last episode. Tribe and or army. We will get to know who these characters are a little bit in this episode. We are also going to go back into Ditya and Ronnie's story. I'd heard the name consistently throughout this episode. I'm like, oh, okay, so her name is Ronnie. That's how it's correctly pronounced. Also, we are going to get a little bit more backstory of Tommy and kind of his desperate need for medication, and we still don't quite understand why, and I want to know. I want to know why Tommy is so desperate for this medication. I know that we saw in an earlier episode he was doing something with his knee, but I'm just kind of curious what exactly is the problem with his knee. I want to know more, because really I think that his knee might come into play in some other episode. So, really, as people will know through the other episodes, I really become invested in Tommy. And because really I had seen Tommy in previous things before this. I remember watching him in a show called Dracula, where he was kind of like the Dracula's assistant in that show. I know there's a billion Dracula shows out there, and the guy who is the lead guy who is in From Paris from Love, that's the guy who became Dracula in that show. Not John Travolta, but the other guy, the guy from Tudors, the main guy from Tudors. He was also in this Dracula show as Dracula. So, kind of narrowing down the search of what I'm talking about. But yeah, I saw Tommy previously on that show, and so immediately once I saw him on this show, immediately was like, oh, I know this guy. I've seen him before. But anyways, I really did I love the way that they approach these episodes. They're not trying to cram a ton of information to you in every episode, and that's the thing that I enjoy about this. We get these little trickles here and there, and then they push on to the next episode, so you're like, man, I kind of want to know more. I'm kind of invested, and I kind of want to see where this story is going to head. And also, eventually, I'm just every every single episode, I'm trying as much as possible to have my heart made out of granite or stone, just so that way I don't get too concerned over any number of these characters. Because immediately I'm just like, is this where it's gonna happen? Is this gonna be it? So I just kind of have to really remove myself from the episode, realizing that at any point in time, any number of people could either get sick, could either get shot, could either die in any number of ways, and so that's what I'm just expecting, and that's what I'm trying to pull away from as much as humanly possible. Going into this episode, we are not going back to Amy in this episode. Amy, who was in the last episode, is not in this episode. I'm assuming that maybe she is probably going to be in another episode somewhere down the road, but I guess they had to kind of what they're trying to do is they're keeping the Gus and Tommy story a focus thing, and they're trying to get Aditya and Ronnie their story having it be two things that are consistent. And then they are kind of just adding a certain character into this story. So it'll be interesting when they pluck in Amy eventually somewhere, I'm assuming down the line. But going into this, I thought this was a very interesting visual episode. Plus, it also does help us, especially when they get to the thing called the market, where how we can really understand and grasp what is kind of going on in this world now. How eventually when Tommy's really trading for things, how desperate people really are. and that's kind of the fascinating thing. So, going on to this, as I got into my 5 minute description of what is going on cryptically in the show, I think it's about that time to go into this spoiler-tastically, and let's go into that double five to otherwise say it's about that time to go into spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this episode. So, in the very beginning, we are to showcase what we were to have called a tribe of people at the tail end of this episode and not quite understand who these people are. In this episode, we get to understand who they are. It seems like this tribe is called the Animal Army, and so it seems that in the very beginning of this, we are to see how they are to have an origin to lead them up to the moment of which that we had seen them last on the very last episode. So in the very beginning of this episode, we have this animal army who are playing video games together. They are seemingly in some virtual reality headset, and it seems like there is one leader, which I'm assuming is Bear, that is going and telling people what to do. She's at some point letting people know when a girl like Tiger is down, or when Tiger needs to do her ultimate and stuff like that. Kind of like Bear is kind of the leader of this and kind of orchestrating people to go and try to make it through this portion of this video game. And so we all of a sudden have a red alert going on. Like, of course, for a lot of people like Janine in Ghostbusters, or like the usual person that is to be manning some computer somewhere and realize there's some kind of thing that this animal army needs to go out and do. So we have the sirens going off, and the animal army is going out to go and defend this city from what? I don't know, because they don't show that part. They just skip to eventually have them in what is now to be in this show's current time. So let's talk about the Ditty and the Ronnie thing. So we have, because I always try to keep the Gus and the Tony thing at the end. A lot of people could loathe and hate that. But I think, like, really, like, these are things that I think should be early set up, and then, like, the big story is, like, to really just play that to the end. Like, that's how I like to do it. So, Ditty and Ronnie, so we have these two that are going and considering going to a party with a bunch of their people in their neighborhood. And so we have Aditya who's like, well, maybe we shouldn't go because, you know, Ronnie, like, you could really, and so Ronnie's like, you know what, I've been fine. Like, if anything, like, I think that if we go there, if we go to this party, we'll be fine. If anything, let's live life like it's our last day kind of thing. And so Aditya kind of really understands that. Plus, we also have Aditya, who is at some point in the show going and putting a recording to his mouth and kind of taping his everyday medical operations, I guess, for prosperity. But really it is to just easily help people understand what is going on in this show by him doing the tape recording. Like, it's kind of like the old-fashioned, like Doogie Howser typing, like, his little thing on his keyboard to just kind of, like, help people understand, like, maybe the moral of the story at the end of all of this, or to, like, understand the episode, or what his thoughts were. Like, we have Aditya's kind of inner monologuing thoughts about what he is thinking, what he's feeling. So that helps us invest in Aditya, because Aditya is to mention that I believe Dr. Bell, who is the previous doctor of Ditya, we have Aditya, who is looking through the processes of the old doctor's work, and he's like, yeah, a lot of these things were very unorthodox, and I don't know if I could be able to do any number of these things that this doctor was trying to do. Really, still, there is a secret about via the last episode that they didn't go into this episode saying what exactly they are goofily doing. I'm wondering if they are maybe trying to infuse like a animal's DNA into people, and that is maybe trying to hold off this whole people getting sick thing. Like, so maybe they have to try infuse animal DNA into humans, like a snake or a lizard or whichever, like because it worked out so well for the hybrids, and maybe the hybrids aren't affected by this thing. So maybe what they're trying to do is take the animal DNA and put it into humans to see if that will be a cure of sorts, or some kind of animal kind of thing to get into humans to try and fight off this illness. I'm assessing. I could be wrong. That's why it's very unorthodox. That's what I'm assuming or assessing. So, pushing on. So, Aditya and Ronnie are to go to this party. They are to play all kind of normal party games like charades, like somebody's like going for a movie and stuff like that. And so eventually we get down to like it seems like everybody's having fun at this party, and then eventually we have one guy who is to mention that he is to have made like a pecan pie, and we have Aditya who's like, well, hey, like, where did you get like the pecans from? And so we all of a sudden have this guy who is all of a sudden, I think, having some kind of like tick with his fingers or something, and then so all of a sudden, like, this guy is like held to a chair, and everybody's like going and looking at this guy, and they're like, oh my god, he can be infected. Like he could be the one that could kill us all off right now. And so we immediately have people scrambling to go and find tests to see if this guy is if he's sick. And so we have Aditya who's like, well, I forgot my scanner in in my office or something. And so we have a woman who luckily has a test right by her. And so we have Aditya testing this guy's blood. And so Aditya is trying to tell this guy, it's like, well, hey, man, like, if you're perfectly fine, then, like, everything will go back to normal. And, like, we'll treat this as if it never happens. Just, like, hope for the best. So Aditya is to go and test the blood, and he is to see this, like, purplish color, I believe, which is to signify that this guy is sick. And so they all of a sudden, like, these guys start wrapping this guy around in bubble wrap, and then everybody leaves the home, and they burn this house to the ground. And Ronnie and Aditya had mentioned before about a guy who had his home burnt once before. And I'm like, oh, okay, so, like, this can help you understand what happened earlier on in the episode, and that's the thing that I actually do enjoy about that, is, like, they go on and actually explain things. Like, there could be a numerous amount of times where they could be leaving everything in the dark, and people are just like, but what about that scene before? And then it's, like, foreshadowing to help you understand what's going on with these people. So really, I think that's just the basis of that part of this episode. We eventually have Aditya and all the people who are to start, like, singing as this house is burning down, and so moving on. So now we're to get to the Gus and the Tommy story. So we have Gus and Tommy who are walking along, and so we have Tommy, who is to bring Gus to this bus. We have Gus in a bus and with no fuss. We have Tommy taking Gus to this bus because this is Tommy's place of his secret stash. So, in other words, like, this is a guy who probably has what Gus's father has, is where, like, he digged a hole in the ground somewhere and has some container of things. Like, basically for Tommy, this bus is that thing, is that, like, same kind of thing that Pubba was doing. So, we eventually have Tommy go into this bus, and immediately we have Gus, who is to mention, good God, there's a lot of rhyming going on. So we have we have Gus mentioning, is this Tommy's home? And Tommy mentions, no, like, remember I told you I don't have a home. And so we have Tommy, who has his secret stash of medication. And so we had Gus, who is to have known that Tommy's drugs were in here because he could smell them. He had the sense of it, and he could smell them from a pretty good distance. So we have Tommy and Gus spending the night in this bus, and so we are to have eventually Gus talking about how he really, like, loves syrup, and Tommy's to mention, it's like, well, have you ever had a caramel apple? Like, it's delicious. And so we have Gus not really understanding what a caramel apple is. And so we have Tommy explaining what a caramel is, and then he has to explain what a caramel apple is, and then what a caramel, like, what the whole thing is, because he just doesn't quite understand. So we have Tommy telling Gus that maybe when they get to the market that that he'll be able to get one for him. And so we have Gus, who goes to sleep on this bus, to have this dream that all of a sudden he is to wake up and it is snowing outside, and it is winter, and it's horrible, and it's cold. And so Gus is to open up the door of this bus to see that Tommy had, I guess, left him. And then Gus is to wake up. And so we now have Tommy coming up with a plan to hide Gus's ears and antlers. He is going to put together some helmet that kind of makes it look like the like these antlers and these ears are just attached to this helmet, that he's like kind of cosplaying as a hybrid, and he isn't actually a hybrid. Like, he's trying to pull that off. We have Tommy, who is consistently telling Gus, well, if I put this helmet on you, you gotta make sure that you stop doing that weird deer You gotta stop moving your ears, and you gotta stop doing weird things, or otherwise, like, someone's gonna find you and someone is going to kill you. So, like I want you to try as much as possible to not move your ears, because you could die here. And Gus can't help moving his ears. He can't. It's a thing. And so every once in a while we have Gus stopping to try to move his ears, but he still is moving his ears. He can't help it. So Tommy and Gus make it to the market. And so we have Tommy, who is trying to give Gus a train ticket to Colorado. And so we have Tommy, who is now trying to trade things like batteries to people. And like I thought that that was interesting. I'm like, so he's trying to trade like common items like food and whatever for like batteries and stuff. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of very interesting. We also have Tommy that is going to a woman to try and get more medication, more of a subscription refillment, and he has a problem getting that. So we have Tommy going and getting a ticket for Gus, and so Gus is to sit down, but of course Gus is too curious. He's wandering around this market. So we have Tommy who has to trade uh, almost his boots for this ticket because he doesn't have enough. Because evidently the money for a ticket has changed. And so we have Tommy's like, dude, I'm not giving up my boots for this. What else could I give you? And so the guy's like, no, 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 not your boots. Like, I want your laces, like your boot laces. And so we have Tommy, who luckily had an extra spare of laces, and so he hands it over. And so he has enough to get Gus his ticket. So we have Gus, who is very curious, and then eventually he is to go on to seemingly find the this food that says free samples, and so he is to he is to eat every single free sample to where the woman's like, hey, like, you took way more than enough. And so we have Tommy who retrieves Gus, and he pays the woman for these free samples. And so Gus is mentioning, but like it said free samples, and Tommy's like, well, yeah, but you took way too much. So we push on. So we have Tommy and Gus getting in line for this train. But while that is going on, we are to notice that Gus is to smell the medication of Tommy's, and so both Tommy and Gus decide to go in some part of the train to try and retrieve more of Tommy's medication. And so we have Gus trying to sniff this out, and so Tommy is to eventually find his medication, but there is a guy in a yellow jumpsuit coming and like, hey, what are you guys doing? And so Tommy ends up beating this guy up, and we eventually have Tommy and Gus like basically trying to run back to think that like no one's going to notice, but they do. So we also have the guys in the yellow jumpsuits start to yell out that it's like, hey, like, there actually is a hybrid among you. And so, like, if anything, like, you guys have to all stop whatever you're doing because there's a hybrid among you. So we eventually have both Tommy and Gus who are at gunpoint, and so the guys in the yellow are to drag Tommy and Gus to this location. And so while they are dragging both Tommy and Gus into this location via being chained, we eventually see the animal army appear to take down these guys in these yellow rain suits and help out Gus and Tommy, because we had Gus who was kind of running around in the marketplace, and we are to have Bear who was to see Gus. And so we have Bear who is telling Gus, it's like, slow down. It's like, if anything, like, take a breath. Just breathe. And so we immediately have Bear spotting Gus. And so, and spotting that he's a hybrid. So they are, I guess, the animal army are to protect all these hybrids. So yeah, like, so we'll see how this story plays out. I thought that this episode was really fun. Like, a lot of people could say that like this story is like really picking up, and it's kind of really interesting how they're retying in certain characters that they thought that like they had not enough story or whatever in an episode, but there's a whole reason for that, because at the tail end they come back and now they are the saviors or the rescuers of both Tommy and Gus. That's why they were important. Like some people might feel like some stories aren't important enough, or there's not enough time invested in certain things. But I think like really like they give you just enough uh to eventually have it count somewhere in the end. So with that said, I think I'm going to try and get this a shorter review. I liked this episode. Really like I like this episode just going on. Like I like where it's heading. Eventually, like the animal army is like a really cool visual. Like I want to see more of them because I kind of saw very little of them before. So it'd be cool to see them actually in full force costume all the time. That will be kind of cool. And I'm kind of wondering eventually where like this whole animal army thing is going to go. Is it just going to be one episode? Is it going to be going forward? Where is it going to go? I'm kind of fascinated with this whole animal army thing, because that seems to be like, man, if that's one way to get like merchandising in this show, like that's one way to do it, but also doing the whole like antlers thing and like kind of doing how they did with like Shrek, where I think in like Shrek 2 they had like the Shrek ears. Like they could do the exact same thing with this show. Like you could have it to where like you have the little ears and the antlers. You can like merchandise the heck out of this show if that's what they really actually wanted to do. But with that said, I am going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.